The tendency is to look at the leader as somebody who has all the solutions, all the answers.
Mm-hmm. Culture and social behavior has big consequences for businesses, but we often overlook it because it's too complex and multidimensional to analyze. What is culture? It's simply the way we do things here. The behaviors, beliefs, values, symbols that we all accept without even thinking about them. Geographies, organizations, companies, families, friendships, all has unique cultures. And it is just like the air we breathe in. It's there and it's a major life force, but it's invisible, which makes it very interesting, but also complex. And our key objective for the podcast is to bring clarity to this complex matter through our conversations with our amazing guests and decode culture for business success. Welcome to the Culture and Podcast, where we connect business to human behavior. I am Nurçin Erdoğan Löfler, brand and culture expert and your host, and today we're going to talk about culture and leadership.
We call them leaders because they will choose to sacrifice so that their people may be safe and protected.
I define a leader as any person who holds themselves accountable for finding the potential in people and processes.
You need to feel like you're making a difference.
Believe in the dream, the aspiration, believe in the journey that we're all on.
To be run by ideas.
Today I am joined by someone who embodies the word leadership for me. I had the chance to know him closely, learn from him, and get inspired by him as a leader. He is the former Executive Regional Director for Burnett and Chief Operating Officer at Publicis, and he currently serves advisory roles at multiple firms. He is also the co-founder and my partner and the COO of TOUGHLOVE Advisors and a fellow certified executive coach. Please welcome Kamal Dimachkie.
Thank you, Nurçin.
Welcome, Kamal. Thank you so much for joining. It's the first episode, and I'm very happy to be able to host you.
I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm honored to be your first host, and I wish you good luck with the podcast.
Thank you so much. So I would like to start with your experience, Kamal, in terms of in the bigger picture, because when we are looking at culture, it's the big picture is actually the geographic cultural elements. And you yourself had been in different leadership roles in different parts of the world, from North America to Europe to Middle East, very different parts of Middle East. I had a very funny incident when I first moved to China. I started trying to do brainstorming and I tried to involve the team, and they were just like staring at me. And a mentor of mine told me, you shouldn't be asking questions. You shouldn't be giving answers to earn the respect as a leader. And that wasn't welcomed by the team at the beginning. So they didn't really appreciate me giving them a voice at the time, until the point that you actually gain their respect by showcasing that you have the answer. Then I got interested by it, and then I found out that there is research that speaks about leadership in different geographies, the decision-making, the communication, and very interestingly, the dark side of leadership can vary based on geographies. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in being a leader in different parts of the world?
The journey has been obviously very interesting, and it continues to be a journey of education and learning. And what is interesting is that obviously when you change geographies, like leaving the GCC or a specific country within the GCC and going all the way to the US and a specific place in the US, the change is like dramatic. Not only are you shifting in distance and time, but you're shifting in environment and atmosphere. What I also found that is very interesting is while the world refers to this part of the world as the Middle East, this is a term that has been coined in the US by a US naval officer back in the early 1900s. Okay. And I understand why it was coined, because it reflects an attempt to place a whole blob of geography into one container, whereas you come here and actually this container has many different compartments that communicate. So leadership in the Levant would be, and its dynamics would be very different to the way it is practiced here. And therefore the effect on culture is very, very different. You have a region that is quite diverse. So parts of it have a feudal background. Another part is tribal. A third is, nomadic. And when we fast forward to today, we notice that organizations, particularly Western organizations, have infused the culture with management approaches, but you still have the local cultural dynamic. So you're constantly are operating in a reactive and dynamic environment.
That's very true. It's a living thing, right? So there is no one solution. Culture is always living and always changing, always evolving. But to your point, it's just very interesting to see that within that context of Middle East, there are so many important differences.
Absolutely. And if you zoom further into a place like the UAE and Dubai, which has like about 200 different nationalities, and you have concentrations of certain cultures that are not originally Arab, yet they interact with an Arab context that was colonized, and an Arab context which is today very open to not only Western but global influences. So culture in the workplace will differ really based on a lot of things taken into account, such as obviously the concentration of the talent in a particular workplace, their backgrounds, the mother company itself, what culture does it promote and cultivate. You have also the local environment, which may have bearing. So you have a lot of things that come to bear on the culture and define a particular flavor or slant of it.
That's very true. That's one of the things what makes culture so almost difficult to tackle. But from a leadership point of view, I think you made a very valid point. UAE itself, with the intense and extreme diversity that it carries in the workplace, like every aspect of it as well. Do you have any tips for leaders in the UAE to manage that diversity, to bring that leadership across?
Sure. In the context of this region, and for those of us who were brought up in the region, we have a particular way of regarding and relating to our leaders. So I come from a generation where the power was firmly concentrated with the elders, with authorities, with systems, with organizations. So you related in a particular way to your elders. In school, you listened, you didn't talk back. You entered the workforce, you bring all of this baggage and conditioning with you. So this is a region that is in the middle of dramatic change to start with. And the tendency is to look at the leader as somebody who has all the solutions, all the answers. Mm-hmm. And that context, in my opinion, breeds an environment or cultivates an environment where ego naturally springs and develops and takes hold and is in the driving seat. So you're no longer just dealing with a particular concept and expression of leadership. You are also dealing with, if you will, a cultural consideration, and you have to cater to that if you want to advance. Now, that can be dialed up or dialed down depending on the situation you are in. But to bring it full circle and back to your question, what advice would I give? I would say observe one of the fundamentals for leadership, which is to remain humble. There's nothing more anchoring than humility in a leader. And humility by default means that you as a leader may have experience, but certainly do not have all the answers. And you stand to gain from remaining open to different perspectives. And that openness can create a culture of openness, can create a culture of motivation, can create a culture of desire to learn, to progress, a culture where wherever we are, no matter how successful we are today, we are A, not at the finish line, and B, this status can be fleeting, meaning we have it today, we may lose it tomorrow. So you need to constantly remain open to the fact that something new may come. What didn't apply yesterday may apply in 3 days from today. So this humility plus openness mean a great deal and are phenomenal signals. And the last bit is, and I don't know where the conversation will take us today, we may touch on it or not. I think once you talk about leadership, you should not, would not, you wouldn't want to miss the fact that you have to model the way. So there is a lot of modeling and leading by example.
Yeah, walking the talk, definitely.
Absolutely. So ultimately, humility, openness, and walking the talk coexist. And if you want a healthy environment, if you want a healthy culture, there's nothing more powerful than for a leader to embody these dynamics and these values.
So openness, humility, and walking the talk. As we say, I would say not only for UAE or Middle East, but I would say maybe these are the beyond culture dynamics that every leader who wants to build a healthy culture needs to embody.
Sure. But we live on planet Earth.
Yes.
And the reality is that while this ideal is highly desirable and actually quite romantic to think about, to talk about, and to practice, reality often shows us examples that are very, very dramatically different. And where the consideration set puts all of these aside, and different approaches are adopted, like people who not only like to lead from the front, but like to lead from, top down. And that obviously breeds a totally different environment. And I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah. On that point, I want to ask your definition, because there is a new buzzword, especially, I would say, since COVID, there is a lot of awareness what that work environment is like, and how people start acknowledging the value of their life, acknowledging the value of their self and their needs and purpose, and a lot of very interesting personal conversations or personal awareness started that reflected on culture in general and culture in the workplace. And there is this new buzzword that everybody speaks about, the toxic culture. It has many different meanings, in my opinion. It seems different dynamics. But I want to hear from you a little bit, what is your definition of a toxic culture? When does a culture becomes toxic?
It's a very good question. The word toxic in itself is fascinating. So if you were to check its definition, toxicity or toxins are organic matter that are produced by the body itself. So this is not an outward an outward influence. Okay, it's self-generated, and that's when your body starts acting in a different way, unhealthy way, in response to triggers in its own chemistry. Okay? Unlike poison, which is an external component that gets injected into a body, toxins are self-generated. So if you take that definition and work with it from
That's very interesting, actually.
a chemistry point of view, okay, look at an organization as a body. When you have toxicity, it means that you have something unhealthy that is starting to be generated internally.
And also killing you, isn't it? Like actually harming you.
It is harming you, certainly, not necessarily killing you, but obviously, if you don't do anything about it, sooner or later you are going to, hit a downward spiral. And these things tend to start from very simple, basic things. Okay? So the absence of health, toxicity, or the erosion of health can be because of bad modeling or inconsistent modeling, can be due to a leader saying one thing, doing something else, can be because of somebody being economical with the truth or being misleading or preaching one thing and behaving selectively in its application. All of these things that sometimes need not necessarily be picked up as hard, firm, concrete examples, but you start feeling in your gut as a member of that organization. And your first reaction is perhaps to brush it aside, but with consistency, you stop brushing it aside and you notice a trend. And that trend, depending on the environment that is cultivated, if it's an environment where free speech is encouraged and promoted, you may talk openly about it. But toxicity normally rarely ever starts from one place. So you've got a number of dynamics working together. So with inconsistency, with power plays, come a subtle spirit of intimidation. So you start seeing little things indicating a beginning of a breakdown, right? And that breakdown perhaps is initially expressed internally by people losing respect.
Yeah, and also even worse, resignation, right? So people giving up.
So when you get to a stage where people are start to resign, essentially the statement that is being made is, I am not aligned with that. I don't like it. I do not identify with it. I have either tried to do something about it or I feel I am powerless to do something about it, but I feel that I am withering and no longer blossoming in such an environment, and it is unhealthy for me. A part of me is perhaps under attack and is suffocating. Okay? Just between brackets, at one point in time, in reaction to a dramatic change in my career, I woke up one day, and when I went to the office and I was talking to one of my mentors, I said, look, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I cannot recognize myself. And that scared me, and my mentor was shocked. So when you are in a situation where you find that you're starting to not recognize yourself in a particular environment and are powerless to change it, then it is quite natural that you may want to leave, because that is an expression of a desire to survive and to thrive. So yeah, toxicity will create that. Okay, so it's interesting. I don't know if you've read The Life of Pi. There's a phenomenal passage early on in the book which talks about why animals migrate. And normally when we think about it, animals, we tend to expect that animals migrate because they're going to a better place. But that is false. Animals migrate because they are running away from something.
Yeah.
So it's not the attraction of better.
Yeah,
it is
it's
the
avoidance
repulsion
of
of worse.
Yes.
And when people leave organizations, you have the equivalent of animal migration during the seasons. Something's bad is happening and I need to move away from it. Otherwise, it won't be good for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it. So in terms of the toxic environment, one of the key things that is comes to my mind is communication style, relationships, power dynamics, and risk taking. When we look at those 4 pillars, what would you recommend to leaders to kind of, because I mean, it's clearly the toxic culture, as people call it, leads to migration of workforce and a lot of lost opportunity and productivity. What should they watch out to make sure that this doesn't happen to them as a leader?
I think people can only be who they are and who they desire to be.
Oh, we can. Okay, that's the second part got me.
So what that says, that talks to authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that connects back to what we discussed earlier, which is walking the talk. Walking the talk for me is not just about leadership by example, but about embodying a certain set of values, aligning yourself with them and living them. So I think as a leader, first of all, you need to be self-centered and aligned. Number 2, you need to communicate very transparently. Okay. And that level of transparency, you need to take note of the impact it is having. So you need to constantly assess. When a plane comes to land, there is constant communication between its instrument and ground. And that communication is fundamental because the aircraft is sending signals that I'm approaching and I'm about to land. And by taking the response to these signals, the reflections, if you will, is a plane and a pilot able to land safely. Ignore these signals and the aircraft will crash. Okay? So you as a leader, first of all, I think when it comes to communication, it's important to be transparent. It's important to be consistent. It's important to own up because communication is also a manifestation and an expression of behavior. So that communication needs to be consistent with that. And at the same time, I think you need to remain very open to what you're seeing and hearing around you. So
getting the signals and being able to act on them in the moment.
Yeah, and acting on, recognizing the impact. So there were instances over the years when I would call for an all-hands meeting, a town hall, call it whatever you want, and I would be addressing points that were important to the organization, as escalated to me by a variety of people. So ultimately, most of these conversations were about what we are dealing with, not only as a business, but for the people and impacts them. And I realized in a number of instances, some people were starting to start wandering with their looks, looking elsewhere. Some were on their phones. Some were disengaged. I realized as a leader that it is my responsibility to do something about it. It is true that I walked in, everybody is clear on what the subject of the conversation is about. It's clear its level of importance. Yet as I was delivering the communication, I realized that, hey, I am not capturing everybody in the way I desire. And if I continue and persist along that path, I'm going to lose them and I will fail to deliver the message that is important for them. Yes, you can argue. They could lose. But as a leader, I am the captain of that ship. It's my responsibility. It starts and ends with me. So this recognition, which is why I spoke about humility in the beginning. I could argue that I'm the leader, I have to be listened to. That's not how life works. It's not how business works. This is not how people work.
This is not how human beings work. Yes, true. So those unspoken cues and messages, especially when you have the chance to get that observation, is very important for a leader to capture and just make sure that they don't miss those cues, because even not saying anything is a communication, isn't it? Or not being engaged is a communication that most of the time it's very easy for a leader to kind of overlook it and not take it into consideration to act on it.
True. So what is interesting is along my journey, I noticed a number of leaders who will actually gather people and talk at them. They would lecture them as if they were instructors and their team members were students.
That's very interesting. Talk at them, not talk to them.
Yeah. And, increasingly, and I also wish to admit that I was also very conscious of the fact that I look very, very serious. If I have a focused look, it looks potentially intimidating. And that's not how I want to be. This is not how I am on the inside. I like to crack jokes. I like to have easy conversations. Yes, I'm curious. I want it to be intellectually stimulating, but ultimately I am engaging with people because of the fact that we're both going to grow as a result of that exchange. And I decided that I shall have conversations with my people. And I would try and prepare for it in a way to generate a response. And whenever you get like 150, 200 people together in a room, my experience has been that very few would actually raise their hands. There's something intimidating or disrupting that return of communication. And I would figure out ways every time, work very hard to make sure that I engage them. Okay, by the use of humor, by the use of specific cues that matter to some, but perhaps not to all, to start, chipping at that wall and allow a bit of water or light to come out, and then chip some more and furthermore and on until everybody, or perhaps not everybody, but until a considerable number of people relax and a new vibe permeates the room.
On that note, actually, one of the key things when we speak with leaders, we want to underline is it's life. And when we're speaking about organizations, it's thousands of people sometimes, and it's very almost a part of the normal life that there will be a certain level of what we call now toxicity or the bad apples and all that. But what is important, what I'm hearing from you, what you're describing is kind of taking intervals to detoxify or reconnect on the way until the problem becomes so big that there is no return from there. So with every big meeting or every kind of interaction that you're talking is actually opening that path again to clear up, going to a detoxifying moment for the organization. So maybe we have to be also realistic. There will be a certain level of tension, lack of communication and all that. But there has to be, or it's leaders' responsibility to realize, acknowledge, and act on it.
What a brilliant observation, Nu. It's interesting. until now, I had never thought about it, but hearing you talk about it strikes me as a fundamental law of life. Let me expand. The heart of any living organism works and rests. There's a certain cadence. But even if you strain the heart, it'll continue to work and rest. Right? Okay. Another example. We sleep. Why do we sleep? The reason behind sleep is a biological need to detoxify the brain. And it's a chemical process that takes anywhere between 7 to 8 hours, which is why you need to sleep that long regularly. And if you are not, you are paving the way for problems down the road. Speaking of toxicity, and can result in a lot of maladies that increasingly science and medicine are connecting to sleep. Perhaps not the only reason, but a major contributor, reason. Right? Yes. Look at nature. Forests, greenery produce oxygen, so releasing a benefit, and pulling in carbon dioxide. So there are two sides to it, two handles to life, if you will.
Everything, isn't it?
Yeah? To organic matter. And I think if we take our cues from nature or from the universe around us, what you're saying is the absolute truth. Yes, it's not enough to impart, but it's also important to detoxify, to clean up all the time. Even if you don't see dust settling, there is dust.
There is, yeah.
Okay, so clean it up. Find the mechanisms that help you as a leader to keep the environment fresh and clean. And quite honestly, apart from it being hard work, there is something that precedes it, is the need for awareness. Because as a leader, I have never been taught to do that. I didn't have somebody mentoring me or sharing their experience that this is how it works. It doesn't mean that I have been wronged. I think the collective body of management's knowledge was not at that stage. But today we are increasingly more aware. And if anything, COVID has accelerated and spiked the need to be more aware. The awareness of other things than, running flat out 5 days a week, God knows how many hours, often missing on weekends and holidays, missing family, missing a lot of what energizes you to deliver business outcomes.
I actually hear a couple of very interesting points in your last sentence, very inspiring. But one of the things that I want to kind of pick from there, that you were saying that you didn't have a coach, you didn't have a mentor. It's always very surprising to me, even to this day, especially in the region, especially in the UAE. I don't see many leaders having coaches. I don't see many leaders accepting the idea of coaching, accepting the idea of mentoring. I would even always go for coaching more than mentoring as a leader. But we see in sports world, all elite athletes have coaches, not one, but many. And that's kind of a normalized approach to go the extraordinary success. Because what the coaches does for athletes as well, they watch from outside, they observe the environment, they observe the competitor, they observe the athlete, and give that very valuable awareness and recognition of what can be done differently, and just creating that climate to improve. But leaders doesn't seem to have that luxury, need, awareness. Where is the gap?
This is a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we can dedicate a complete podcast session to it. Thank you for asking the question. Look, ultimately, you're absolutely right. In the sports world, coaching is par for the course. You do not get involved in any sports activity without some form of a coach being around you.
Yes.
Okay, professional athletes will work very hard, pay top dollar to make sure they are collaborating with a coach that aligns well with them and that can help them develop and grow. So what is interesting about this is, first of all, you've got an established practice. You can see I'm perking up here. You've got an established practice. Number two, you have a basic recognition by the athletes that they need to embark on a journey, and that journey involves continuous evolution, continuous motion, continuous development. Otherwise, it becomes like sitting on a bike and not pedaling. What's going to happen to you? You're going to fall, yeah, or maybe lean on the ground, put a foot on the ground. So that is in as far as coaching in the sports universe. But coaching for business and for non-athletic purposes is reasonably new. It's about like 30 years old or so, all right? Depending on where you are in the world, you will find that the business environment is much more developed and open to this concept, okay? So my experience has been that it is starting to come into its own in North America.
True.
Where there's quite a lot of leadership and pioneering in the area of coaching. And we're starting to see small pockets of it in this part of the world.
Yeah, well, what do you think is stopping the leaders? I mean, just to overcome their thoughts that are kind of blocking them to get that support, because honestly, that's even another conversation. But leadership is quite a lonely place.
Terribly lonely.
It is a lonely place, and if we have time, we'll talk about the servant leadership, which we both share from a vision point of view, and I know you embody it extremely strongly as well. But it's a very lonely place to be by nature, and actually that lack of support to create those awarenesses, because when we're talking about everything around leadership, it all starts from first and foremost being aware what's going on wrong, being aware that where the bottlenecks in the organization are, and that awareness requires that kind of a reflection partner where it's a safe place to really create self-awareness and environmental awareness. But there is a bottleneck in this part of the world that it's not okay. It's almost a weakness to have a coach.
So it's interesting. I think the choice of the word awareness is spot on. For me, awareness covers a lot of things. Mm-hmm. First of all, being a leader does not mean you're the master of the universe. This is number one. This is, I think, a first level of awareness.
It is true.
Yeah. Being a leader simply means you have a responsibility and an obligation, not only towards shareholders, okay, but primarily to the people who enable the shareholders to thrive, right? So you've got that awareness. So by default, if you will, you need this awareness that if I am their leader, I am actually their servant, to use your expression. Number two, I think like many developments that start somewhere, this ripple effect is going to require time to reach further and further away from the center. Okay, we've seen it with fashion, we see it with brands, we see it with organizational approaches. We see it with a lot of things. So part of it is that. But I think also the notion of, coaching itself is going to will require to overcome a big hurdle, which is for Middle Eastern leaders to become aware of the need that if they want to sustain good performance and generate even better performance, they need somebody to hold the mirror to them. They need an outside perspective. And it's not common practice here. I have, in my experience, I haven't seen many heads of organizations who will genuinely come and say, "Come, can you spare me 15 minutes? I'm thinking of this. What do you think? I did this. It's not sitting comfortably with me. What observations can you share with me?"
But that's very good. It almost goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, where
It's all connected.
It is not okay as a leader to not know the answer. Maybe in this part of the world, everybody also has that notion, or almost a prerequisite. If you're the leader, you need to rather know the answer, or that will take us to another point: do not show vulnerability, which then opens up a different part. Being vulnerable, or showing that you're vulnerable as a leader, is actually an extreme tool to connect to the teams. Actually, an extreme tool to overcome that definition of toxicity, being open, being real, authentic to your teams, and ask their support when you're being their servant. But it's, again, I would say, not so easy for the region.
So there are 2 points here. Certainly, you have the point about vulnerability, and I'll touch on it. And the first one about having all the answers. What I would say is that this is a part of the world where face matters. Okay? I know this is not the Far East, and I understand how face works in that context. What has never been addressed or talked about, and if it has, then I'm not aware of it, is how important face is, and loss of face, to people in this part of the world it is. So in tribal and feudal environments, you need to be careful, because it's like walking into a minefield. So if you're able to peel that away, I think, and train people who are aspiring to lead people, or make them aware that this has nothing to do with that. This is about a totally different construct. And actually, this new construct, where you are much more aware, where you're sensitive to the impact you are having, where you need to take these cues and factor them into your human algorithm, so to speak. What is AI, if not its ability to take input, try, improve, and continue that virtuous cycle? Yeah. So if we emulate that, then I think you're onto something. The other thing is vulnerability. I think you're absolutely right. So I grew up in an environment where as a male, or as somebody in charge, you didn't show emotion. You didn't, and that is wrong to say, actually. You didn't show sadness. You didn't express it. So I remember losing my father at the age of 23. And at the end, after we had buried, a much older cousin than myself comes and taps me on the shoulder saying, "You did good."
By not crying.
He didn't say that, but I remember that I walked very stoically, I didn't let my emotions betray me.
Betray you is also a very interesting word to say that.
Sure. I didn't allow them to come out.
Yeah.
Actually, when I think...
That you didn't have them, you didn't allow them...
It's actually, I did not even experience them. Okay. So to explain the level at which some societies will suppress these things.
Yes.
Yeah. So fast forward 30, 40 years later, people who have been brought up in such environments and cultures become hardwired. And in fairness, this notion of vulnerability, I started genuinely experiencing during COVID, because the overriding drive in me, while not losing sight of the fact that I was a hired employee and have obligations to management and to shareholders and the need to meet KPIs, I could not ignore the human dynamic that I saw unfolding in front of me. So my expression was a very human expression. I started catering for what made people feel better, so that they can, to start with, continue living and navigate through a massive disruption and a black swan. And I realized that a number of instances I had to propose suggestions to them which enabled us to shield the general population. And these expressions on my part were highly emotional. Mm-hmm. So, and that was unusual for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of...
So, and what it produced, and that is what stuck with me, is a phenomenal rallying around me. Mm-hmm. And that there was like a light bulb going on. I mean, not even a light bulb, like a new sun in my life.
Incredible.
Saying, wow, it is powerful.
And it's working,
it's authentic,
for the benefit.
and it is true, you know? And my God, I didn't realize that. And people started reacting very differently to me, you know? And that was a massive moment of awakening that came from visceral, hard experience. You know, when you make such dramatic U-turns in your career and life, they don't happen by accident. They are potentially the result of an accumulation, potentially that accumulation aligning with who you are, but certainly they required some sort of a catalyst at one point in time. We need to catalyze more and more leaders to the power of vulnerability.
Yes.
To the force of authenticity that comes. And to busting the myth that being vulnerable does not equate weakness.
It's just the opposite. Being vulnerable
it's a superpower.
Embodies power and strength to be able to open up. And I think more and more Gen Z coming to the workforce, they will demand vulnerable, authentic, strong leaders, and not leaders kind of hiding behind their titles to bring them best selves to the workforce. But that's already, again, a conversation on its own. Before we close, one last question. Can you tell us one big lesson or a failure of your incredible journey as a leader to implement the best culture for the organization?
Luckily, I have a lot of failures. I've had quite a few. And luckily, I learned the hard way. But more importantly, I was blessed in having had a number of chances. Early on in my leadership journey, I was so hell-bent on delivering results that I would literally take no prisoners. I wouldn't accept anything. And my reaction was, I'm embarrassed to say today, was dramatic and almost violent. Yeah, I would get really worked up, and I would not hesitate to let my emotions show.
That's the dark side of leadership.
Oh my God! I mean, when I think back, I would ask myself, how can two people exist in the same body and mind? Yeah, but to my good fortune, a number of the people that I was aggressive with seemed to understand where it came from. Mm-hmm. And my career evolved in a way where I got stretches of time during which I would think and reflect and reconcile and get the opportunity to decide how I want to show up. With time, a lot of mistakes and experience, I learned that there's got to be a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the massive realization, the biggest lesson is the better way is by being true to who you are.
Yeah.
And understanding that, like me, everybody else is fighting battles that we don't know about. And the major learning for me as a leader is not to allow this halo and shadow of leadership to obscure the fact that, when you work with an intern, when you work with somebody who is significantly younger than you and a junior to you, be mindful of impact. Recognize where they are at in their journey, because at one point in time, that's where exactly I was.
Yes.
And bring them along.
Mm-hmm.
And that created a dramatic shift in my approach. I learned that if I am unhappy with something, never to express it against the person who was delivering the goods, but to depart from a point that this individual has done their best. And by doing their best, all they could get me is this. Now, it is incumbent upon me as a leader and my responsibility to take that opportunity and turn it into a fascinatingly engaging educational one where we get a better product. They can see a pathway to that betterment and they would enjoy it along the way. And what I'm happy with is that I was able to pull that out, to manifest that behavior in the trickiest and most pressured of times. So I'm not saying I'm done. This will always be a work in progress. But
it's a journey, for
sure.
If
you are able to maintain, I wouldn't say control, because control for me would be the wrong word. It means there are forces raging to come out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to maintain that harmony and tranquility in the face of massive professional typhoons, then I think you're on to something interesting.
Yeah, but that's easier said than done, isn't
And
it?
I'm not suggesting it is easy. And for me, this is a part of the journey of mastery. You need to be comfortable spending a lot of time on the plateau, practicing, rehearsing, doing over and over, even the basic things, because then they become hardwired. And whenever there is a rise in the journey, then you are better prepared.
Then it's a good breakthrough. Kamal, thank you so much. I think it was very interesting, and it was a great pleasure for me to have this conversation eye to eye with you. But before we close, we have a little fun part that I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions and just one word answers.
Let's have fun then.
Yes. Zoom or Teams?
Zoom.
Agency side or client side?
Agency side.
Mac or PC?
Mac.
Brainstorming or question storming?
Don't know.
Multinationals or startups?
Startups today.
Coffee or energy drink?
Coffee.
Instagram or TikTok?
If I have to choose, Instagram.
One favorite quote?
One favorite quote. A smooth sea doesn't make a skillful sailor.
Oh, very good one. Learning or knowing?
Learning, always.
Horse riding or squash?
That is unfair. Horses.
I know it too well. Horses?
Absolutely,
Okay.
horses.
What is one leadership secret you didn't tell anyone? You didn't give us that secret in this podcast.
One leadership secret, make your people feel good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamal. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all the amazing insights. It was a pleasure. And I do believe that you're going to bring me and this podcast and to us a lot of luck. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thanks, Nurchan.